Scott Boyd's eyes snapped open as sparks exploded around him, the cryostasis pod sputtering and dying as he punched his fist through the reinforced glass. He tumbled out onto the floor of the ship, metal shrapnel digging into his face and bare chest. The Terran Space Command, TSC exploration vessel was a mess. Fires raged, the floor was angled, and mangled corpses littered the floor around him. The TSS Endeavour had crash-landed. Hard. "Fuck!" Scott shouted. He dragged himself to his feet, slapping the flames off his cargo pants. His body ached and his head was splitting, an after-effect of cryostasis that a shot of stimulants would quickly fix if he could find them in the darkness and smoke. He stumbled around, boots slipping in blood and hydraulic fluid leaking from ruined machinery. Alarms blared, and the evacuation sirens wailed, a shrill, whining sound. Not that there was anyone left to evacuate. Scott Boyd was the sole survivor of the 150-member crew. The exploration vessel's hull had been breached by an unknown energy pulse, originating from the uncharted planet they were now stranded on. LX-407, a lush, Earth-like world with a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere they had been preparing to survey from orbit. Before some alien weapon had gutted the ship and sent them spiraling to the surface in a ball of flame and smoke. Now Scott was alone on an alien world teeming with unknown life. Armed with only his wits, limited supplies, a blaster on his hip and the burning drive to survive. He had to fix the comms array, get a distress signal out to the nearest human outpost. Without a rescue, he had little hope, and he refused to die alone on some nameless rock at the arse end of the cosmos. The rest of humanity needed to be warned about whatever the hell had destroyed the ship, before more explorers blundered into the same fate. Scott grit his teeth and sealed his envirosuit. He grabbed a plasma cutter and slung a survival pack over his shoulder. Time to see if this planet's so-called intelligent life could be reasoned with, or if they'd need a few human-made smoking holes in their reptilian skulls before they got the message to leave Terrans the hell alone. Word of Scott's supposed divinity spread like wildfire among the reptilian Ledosians. Hydrus, the warrior who had first encountered the human, eagerly brought Scott before the ruling council of his city-state. The council chamber was a grand, circular room, its walls adorned with intricate carvings depicting the Ledosians' history and mythology. At the center of the chamber sat the elderly and cunning warlord Zarthax, his scales a dull gray and his eyes gleaming with ambition. As Scott stood before the council, he attempted to explain his true nature as a human explorer from another world. "I am not a god," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "I am a member of a species called humans, from a planet far beyond your star system. My ship crashed here, and I am simply trying to find a way back home." But Zarthax and the council members seemed to interpret his words differently. They murmured among themselves, their hushed whispers filled with awe and reverence. "The god speaks of his divine origins," Zarthax declared, his voice booming through the chamber. "He has come to us from the heavens to bless our city-state with his presence and power." Scott tried to protest, but his words were drowned out by the excited chatter of the council members. Zarthax, sensing an opportunity to expand his own influence and power, rose from his seat and addressed the gathered Ledosians. "From this day forward," he proclaimed, "our city-state shall worship this divine being as our patron deity. We shall hold grand festivities in his honor and erect a temple in his name." The chamber erupted in cheers and applause, leaving Scott overwhelmed and stunned. As the council session ended and the Ledosians began to prepare for the celebrations, Scott found himself swept up in a whirlwind of activity. Ledosians bowed and prostrated themselves before him, offering gifts and prayers. The streets of the city-state were soon filled with music, dancing, and the aroma of exotic foods. Amidst the chaos, Scott realized the potential consequences of his unintended deception. He knew he had to find a way to escape and continue his mission to contact the TSC for rescue. As the festivities reached their peak, Scott slipped away from his attendants and made his way towards the outskirts of the city. But his escape did not go unnoticed. A group of Ledosian warriors, their suspicions aroused by Scott's sudden disappearance, confronted him in a narrow alley. They drew their weapons, hissing and snarling as they demanded to know his true intentions. Scott, his heart pounding in his chest, realized he had no choice but to defend himself. He reached for his plasma cutter, the tool he had salvaged from the wreckage of his ship. As the warriors closed in, Scott activated the cutter, its bright blue beam illuminating the alley. In the confusion and chaos that followed, Scott inadvertently struck one of the warriors with the plasma cutter. The Ledosian crumpled to the ground, his chest smoking from the searing wound. The other warriors, seeing the display of Scott's divine power, fell to their knees in reverence and fear. Word of the incident spread quickly, and Zarthax wasted no time in spinning it to his advantage. He declared that Scott had shown his favor for their city-state by striking down a warrior who had dared to question his divinity. The celebrations intensified, with Ledosians now more convinced than ever of Scott's godhood. As the festivities continued, Scott found himself approached by a young Ledosian scribe named Tyrix. Unlike the others, Tyrix seemed hesitant to accept Scott's supposed divinity. "Are you truly a god?" he asked, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Or are you something else entirely?" Scott, seeing an opportunity to gain an ally and learn more about the Ledosian culture, began to confide in Tyrix. He shared his true story, explaining his mission and the events that had led to his crash landing on their planet. Tyrix listened intently, his eyes widening with each revelation. But unbeknownst to Scott, Tyrix had his own agenda. He was a spy for a rival city-state, tasked with gathering information on the supposed god and the growing power of Zarthax's city-state. As Scott poured out his heart to the young scribe, Tyrix carefully memorized every detail, already planning how he would use this information to his own advantage. As Scott continued to navigate the complex web of Ledosian politics and religion, Tyrix slipped away from the city, under the cover of darkness. The young scribe, his heart heavy with the weight of his deception, made his way to the encampment of warlord Krenox, the ruler of a rival city-state. Tyrix knelt before Krenox, his voice trembling as he relayed the information he had gathered about Scott and the growing power of Zarthax's city-state. Krenox's eyes gleamed with envy and ambition as he listened to Tyrix's report. The idea of a divine being favoring his rival was intolerable, and the warlord's mind raced with possibilities. If he could capture this supposed god and bring him under his own control, his power would be unrivaled. With a fierce determination, Krenox summoned his war council and declared his intention to march on Zarthax's city-state to claim the divine patron for himself. Back in the city, Scott found himself increasingly uneasy as tensions between the two factions escalated. The streets were filled with whispers of war, and the once festive atmosphere had been replaced by a sense of foreboding. Scott, still struggling to understand the full extent of his influence on the Ledosians, sought refuge in the palace of Zarthax as the rival army approached the city gates. As the sounds of battle echoed through the streets, Scott made a startling discovery. During the chaos of the impending conflict, Ledosian scouts had infiltrated the wreckage of his crashed ship, looting various pieces of advanced technology. The implications of this revelation sent a chill down Scott's spine. In the hands of the Ledosians, who had no understanding of the true nature or potential of these devices, the stolen technology could lead to disaster. Desperate to prevent further misuse of the advanced human technology, Scott knew he had to act quickly. As the battle raged outside the city walls, he sought out Hydrus, his most trusted Ledosian ally. In the secluded chambers of the palace, Scott revealed the truth about his human origins and the urgent need to recover the stolen items. Hydrus, torn between his loyalty to Zarthax and his growing trust in Scott, listened intently to the human's words. The weight of the decision before him was immense, but as he looked into Scott's eyes, he saw the sincerity and desperation that lay within. With a heavy heart, Hydrus agreed to help Scott escape the city and pursue the stolen technology. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation had been overheard by one of Zarthax's spies, who wasted no time in reporting the betrayal to the warlord. Zarthax, his fury stoked by what he perceived as a divine test of his faith, ordered Hydrus to be captured and brought before him to face the consequences of his treachery. As Scott watched helplessly from the shadows, Hydrus was dragged before Zarthax in the palace courtyard. The warlord's voice boomed with righteous anger as he condemned Hydrus for his disloyalty, declaring that the only fitting punishment was public execution. The crowd gathered in the courtyard murmured with a mix of shock and anticipation, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Scott, his heart pounding in his chest, knew that he could not stand idly by and watch Hydrus face death on his behalf. The weight of the situation he had inadvertently created pressed down upon him, threatening to crush his spirit. But in that moment, Scott found a resolve he had never known before. He would save Hydrus, recover the stolen technology, and find a way to end the war between the city-states, even if it meant risking everything he had. The fate of the Ledosian civilization, and perhaps his own, hung in the balance. As the crowd gathered to witness Hydrus's execution, Scott activated his advanced stealth technology, a cloaking device salvaged from his crashed ship. He shimmered and vanished from view. Unseen, he crept through the palace corridors, past unsuspecting guards, until he reached the courtyard where Hydrus knelt before the executioner's blade. At the last moment, Scott sprang into action. He fired his plasma cutter, severing the chains that bound Hydrus. Chaos erupted as Scott grabbed Hydrus, and they fled, disappearing into the shadows of the city streets. Alarms blared behind them as they raced through narrow alleys, barely keeping ahead of the pursuing soldiers. Under cover of darkness, they slipped out of the city gates and plunged into the dense jungle beyond. Hydrus led the way, navigating through the tangled undergrowth as Scott followed close behind, his heart pounding with exertion and adrenaline. After hours of trekking, they stumbled upon a hidden village nestled in a misty valley. The village elder, an ancient Ledosian named Xerix, greeted them at the entrance, his eyes filled with wisdom and compassion. "Welcome, travelers," he said, gesturing for them to enter. "You are safe here." As Scott and Hydrus settled in, Xerix shared his concerns about the warlords' endless power struggles. "Their greed and ambition will be the downfall of our civilization," he warned. "But your arrival, Scott, is a sign of hope, a sign of a greater purpose." In the days that followed, Scott immersed himself in the Ledosian culture, learning their ancient customs and prophecies. Xerix spoke of a divine being from the stars, destined to unite the Ledosian people and usher in an era of peace. Scott, realizing the uncanny parallels to his own story, began to question his role in the fate of this alien world. One evening, as Scott and Hydrus sat around a flickering fire, a messenger arrived with dire news. Krenox's forces had raided a nearby village, taking Tyrix and other innocent Ledosians hostage. The warlord demanded Scott's surrender in exchange for their lives. Scott's heart sank with guilt and responsibility. He couldn't let more Ledosians suffer because of him. He made the decision to turn himself in, to save the hostages, and put an end to the bloodshed. But Hydrus and Xerix intervened, their voices urgent and imploring. "Surrendering will only lead to more violence," Hydrus argued. "You must find a way to unite our people against the warlords, to break the cycle of war." Xerix nodded in agreement. "You have the power to change the course of our history, Scott, but you must confront the warlords directly, not bow to their demands." Scott paced, his mind racing with the weight of his choices. Finally he turned to his companions, a plan forming in his mind. "We'll infiltrate Krenox's stronghold," he declared. "We'll rescue the hostages and retrieve the stolen technology. And then we'll find a way to bring the warlords to justice and restore peace to your world." As they set their plan in motion, gathering supplies and weapons, they were unaware of the looming threat. In the distance, Zarthax's forces marched towards the hidden village, their armor glinting in the fading light. The stage was set for a climactic showdown, a battle that would determine the fate of the Ledosian civilization and the role of the supposed god from the stars. Under the cover of darkness, Scott, Hydrus, and a group of skilled Ledosian warriors from Xerix's village crept through the dense jungle, their movements silent and purposeful. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting eerie shadows across their scaly skin as they approached Krenox's stronghold. Scott's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of their mission bearing down upon him. Hydrus held up a clawed hand, signaling the group to halt. He turned to Scott, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "The fortress lies just ahead," he whispered. "We must be cautious. Krenox's guards will be on high alert." Scott nodded, his fingers brushing against the plasma cutter at his hip. The Ledosian warriors, armed with their own primitive weapons, looked to him for guidance. Scott took a deep breath and activated his advanced stealth technology, the device shimmering and casting a faint blue glow across his skin. "Follow my lead," he said, his voice low and determined. "We'll use the terrain to our advantage and infiltrate the stronghold undetected." The group moved forward, their footsteps barely audible against the soft undergrowth. They skirted along the edges of the fortress walls, using the shadows to conceal their presence. Scott's technology allowed them to pass unseen by the patrolling guards, their reptilian eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of intrusion. Inside the stronghold, they navigated the twisting corridors, guided by the Ledosians' intimate knowledge of the layout. As they delved deeper into the heart of the fortress, the sound of whirring machinery and crackling energy grew louder. They approached a heavily guarded chamber, the entrance flanked by two massive Ledosian warriors. Scott motioned for the others to hold back as he crept forward, his stealth device rendering him nearly invisible. With a swift and silent motion, he dispatched the guards, their bodies crumpling to the ground without a sound. The group moved into the chamber, their eyes widening at the sight before them. Krenox had been experimenting with the stolen human technology, crude attempts at reverse engineering scattered across the room. Wires and cables snaked across the floor, connecting to pulsing generators and humming machines. In the center of the chamber, a group of Ledosian hostages huddled together, their scales dull with fear. Among them was Tyrix, his eyes widening as he saw Scott and the others. "You came," he breathed, his voice trembling with relief. "I knew you would." Scott and the warriors quickly freed the hostages, their clawed hands making short work of the restraints. Tyrix grasped Scott's arm, his gaze intense. "I've been working to undermine Krenox from within," he revealed. "I couldn't stand by and watch him abuse your technology, your power." Scott nodded, a flicker of gratitude passing across his face. But their reunion was short-lived as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber. Krenox himself appeared in the doorway, a crude but functional energy weapon clutched in his claws, the design a twisted mockery of Scott's plasma cutter. "You dare to defy me?" Krenox snarled, his eyes burning with rage. "I am the rightful ruler of this world, and your power will be mine." Scott stepped forward, his own weapon humming to life. The two leaders clashed, energy beams scorching the air between them. The chamber erupted into chaos as the Ledosian warriors engaged Krenox's guards, the sound of clashing blades and sizzling plasma filling the air. The Ledosians looked on in shock, the true nature of Scott's technology revealed before their eyes. With Krenox's forces in disarray, Scott and his allies gathered the stolen technology and fought their way out of the stronghold. As they raced through the corridors, Scott planted explosive charges, the timer ticking down with each passing second. They burst out into the night, the explosions ripping through the fortress behind them. The stolen technology was destroyed, Krenox's military capabilities crippled in an instant. Scott supported the wounded Hydrus as they fled into the jungle, the sounds of the stronghold's collapse echoing through the trees. As they made their way back to Xerx's village, Scott's mind raced with the realization that their victory was only temporary. The warlords would continue their battles, their hunger for power unabated, unless he found a way to unite the Ledosian people. But their return to the village was met with a new danger. Zarthax's forces had tracked their movements, the warlord's army amassed at the edge of the village. Xerx emerged from his dwelling, his eyes glowing with an ancient power. The village elder raised his staff, chanting in a long-forgotten tongue, and a shimmering barrier rose around the village, concealing it from Zarthax's view. Scott watched in awe as Xerx turned to him, the weight of destiny heavy in his gaze. "You must find a way to bring the warlords together," Xerx intoned. Only then can our people know true peace. Scott felt the burden of his newfound responsibility settling upon his shoulders. He was no longer just a human explorer, but a symbol of hope for an entire civilization. As he sat in meditation, seeking guidance, a vision flashed before his eyes. The Ledosian gods, their forms shimmering and indistinct, pointed him towards a hidden temple deep in the jungle. Scott rose to his feet, a newfound sense of purpose coursing through his veins. The temple held the key to uniting the warring factions, to fulfilling his role as the prophesied divine being. With Hydrus and his allies by his side, Scott set out into the jungle once more, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Scott stood before the shimmering energy barrier, Hydrus and Tyrix flanking him. The ancient Ledosian village lay behind them, concealed by Xyrix's mystic powers. Before them stretched the untamed jungle, a living labyrinth of twisted vines and towering trees that seemed to pulse with a primal energy. "The temple lies deep within the heart of the jungle," Xyrix said, his voice thin and papery with age. "The path will not be easy. The trials of the ancients will test your worth, Scott of the Stars." Scott nodded, the weight of his destiny settling heavily upon his shoulders. He checked his plasma cutter, the weapon a comforting presence at his hip. Hydrus and Tyrix readied their own primitive arms, their scaled faces etched with grim determination. They set out into the jungle, the humid air clinging to their skin like a living thing. The undergrowth seemed to shift and writhe around them, as if the very jungle itself was alive and aware of their presence. Strange cries echoed through the canopy, the calls of alien beasts hidden from view. As they trekked deeper into the wilderness, the trials began. A chasm yawned before them, spanned only by a narrow, crumbling stone bridge. Scott took a deep breath and led the way, his steps careful and measured. The bridge shuddered beneath their feet, ancient stones cracking and falling away into the abyss below. They crossed, hearts pounding, and pressed on. The jungle grew thicker, the air heavy with the scent of decay and growth. Vines snaked out to snare their ankles, and thorny branches tore at their flesh. Scott hacked through the undergrowth with his plasma cutter, the weapon's blue glow casting eerie shadows in the gloom. Suddenly the ground gave way beneath Tyrix's feet. He cried out as he fell, claws scrabbling at the edge of a hidden pit. Scott lunged forward, grasping the Ledosian's wrist just as he slipped over the edge. With a grunt of effort, he hauled Tyrix back onto solid ground. "Thank you," Tyrix gasped, his eyes wide with fear and gratitude. "The ancients' tests are not to be taken lightly." As they pushed deeper into the jungle, they began to notice the remnants of the ancient Ledosian civilization. Crumbling stone structures peeked out from beneath the tangled vines, their intricate carvings worn smooth by the passage of time. Shattered statues of long-forgotten gods lay toppled in the undergrowth, their sightless eyes staring up at the canopy. Scott paused to examine a mural depicting Ledosian figures working together to build a great city. The image was faded and cracked, but the message was clear. Unity and cooperation had once been the cornerstone of Ledosian society. "Our people were once one," Hydrus said softly, tracing the lines of the mural with a clawed finger. "The warlords have led us astray. We have forgotten the ways of our ancestors." Scott nodded, a sense of purpose growing within him. He knew that he had to find a way to remind the Ledosians of their shared heritage, to bring them together once more. As they neared the temple, the attacks began. Arrows whistled through the air, fired from the shadows of the jungle. Scott and his companions dove for cover, taking shelter behind the crumbling ruins. The ambush had been carefully planned, a coalition of forces from both Zarthax and Krenox, working together to bring down the supposed god from the stars. Plasma fire sizzled through the air, scorching the stone and setting the undergrowth ablaze. Scott returned fire, his shots precise and deadly. Hydrus and Tyrix fought beside him, their primitive weapons no match for the advanced technology of the warlord's forces. In the chaos of the battle, Scott found himself separated from his allies. He fought on alone, his plasma cutter flashing in the gloom. But the odds were against him, and he was forced to retreat deeper into the jungle, the sound of pursuit close behind. He stumbled through the undergrowth, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The vines seemed to reach out to him, guiding him deeper into the heart of the jungle. And there, rising up from the tangled growth, he saw it. The temple. The ancient structure pulsed with an otherworldly energy, its stone walls covered in glowing alien sigils. Scott approached cautiously, his plasma cutter at the ready. The temple doors swung open at his touch, revealing a chamber filled with technology beyond anything he had ever seen. Holographic displays flickered to life, their light casting an eerie glow over the ancient stone. Scott moved deeper into the chamber, his heart racing with a mix of fear and anticipation. And then a figure appeared before him, shimmering and translucent. "Welcome, Scott Boyd," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant. "We are the progenitors, the ones who guided the Ledosians in ages past. We have waited long for your arrival." The figure spoke of the Unity Stone, an artifact of immense power that could unite the Ledosian people and heal their fractured civilization. But the stone could only be wielded by one who was pure of heart and possessed great wisdom. As Scott listened, trying to absorb the weight of the revelation, the chamber doors burst open. Zarthax and Krenox strode in, their forces fanning out behind them. The warlord's eyes gleamed with avarice and ambition as they beheld the ancient technology. "Step aside, false god," Zarthax snarled, leveling his weapon at Scott. "The Unity Stone is mine by right." "No," Krenox hissed, his own weapon trained on his rival. "I alone am worthy to wield its power." Scott looked from one warlord to the other, the realization dawning on him. The true test of his role as the prophesied divine being was not his technology or his combat skills, but his ability to inspire unity and peace. He took a deep breath, his hand hovering over his plasma cutter. The fate of the Ledosian civilization hung in the balance, and the decision he made now would echo through the ages. Scott stepped forward, the Unity Stone pulsing with energy in his hands. He held the artifact aloft, his voice ringing out through the ancient temple. "This stone belongs to all Ledosians," he declared. "I won't let it be used to divide you further." Zarthax and Krenox snarled with rage, their eyes blazing. "Attack!" they roared to their forces. "Seize the stone!" The temple erupted into chaos. Plasma blasts sizzled through the air as the warlord's warriors charged forward, their claws outstretched. Scott dove for cover behind a crumbling pillar, the Unity Stone clutched to his chest. Just as the enemy forces closed in, a fierce battle cry echoed from the temple entrance. Hydrus and Tyrix burst into the chamber, leading a contingent of Xyrix's warriors. They clashed with the warlord's troops, the sound of clashing blades and sizzling plasma filling the air. The temple itself seemed to come alive, ancient technology humming with energy. The walls shook and cracks spider-webbed across the floor, the structure destabilizing. Scott realized the presence of the Unity Stone was triggering long-dormant systems. Amidst the chaos, a realization struck him. The only way to stop the bloodshed was to demonstrate true unity. He leaped out from cover. "Zarthax, Krenox," he shouted, "join me!" The warlords turned, teeth bared. Scott held out the Unity Stone. "This is the only path forward. Put aside your rivalry and work together for your people." The warlords hesitated, doubt flickering in their eyes. The stone pulsed brighter, its energy calling to them. As if in a trance, they stepped forward. The moment their claws touched the stone, blinding light erupted through the chamber. The warlords gasped as a vision unfolded before them. Ledosian cities gleaming under twin suns, a civilization thriving in harmony. They saw the alternative future too, a world shattered by unending war until nothing remained. "We must work as one," Zarthax agreed, his voice hoarse, "for the future of our race." All around them, the temple shuddered with increasing violence. Chunks of masonry crashed down from the ceiling as the structure began to implode. He sprinted for the exit, the warlords and their forces close behind. They leaped through the entrance just as the temple collapsed inward with a deafening roar, ancient stone and advanced technology alike crushed to dust. In the aftermath, an eerie calm settled over the jungle. Scott stood before the assembled Ledosians, the Unity Stone glowing softly in his hands. Zarthax and Krenox knelt before him, their heads bowed. The Ledosians cheered, their voices rising in a chorus of hope. Work began immediately on a new monument to house the Unity Stone, a symbol of the civilization's commitment to cooperation. Scott worked tirelessly alongside Hydrus, Tyrix, and the warlords to establish a system of government that valued unity above all else. Yet even as the Ledosians began to heal, an uneasiness lurked at the edges of Scott's mind. Something was coming, a threat that could unravel everything they'd fought for. He could feel it like a chill in his bones, a looming shadow on the horizon. With the Unity Stone in place, and the Ledosian civilization slowly healing, Scott turned his attention to the trove of advanced technology left behind by the enigmatic progenitors. He spent long hours in the ruins of the ancient temple, poring over the intricate star maps and deciphering cryptic messages etched into the walls. One day, as he traced his fingers along a series of glowing symbols, a hidden chamber rumbled open before him. Scott's heart raced as he stepped inside, his plasma cutter illuminating the darkness. The chamber was filled with pulsing consoles and shimmering holographic projections of distant star systems. As he examined the displays, a sense of unease crept over him. The maps and messages hinted at a looming threat, a malevolent force lurking in the depths of space. Determined to unravel the mystery, Scott sought out Tyrix, who had become a trusted advisor and scholar in the new Ledosian government. Together they worked tirelessly to decipher the ancient texts. The progenitors' words painted a chilling picture of a long-forgotten war against the Vorsath, a species of energy-based life forms bent on consuming all organic life in the galaxy. The progenitors had managed to seal the Vorsath away in a pocket dimension, but the texts warned that their prison was weakening, and they would soon break free. As Scott and Tyrix raced to find a way to prevent the Vorsath's return, strange energy anomalies began to appear across the planet. Shimmering portals tore open in the sky, spilling forth crackling bolts of energy that scorched the earth and sent the Ledosians fleeing in terror. The planet's fragile peace was shattered as panic and destruction spread like wildfire. Scott realized that the Ledosians, still recovering from their long history of conflict, were ill-equipped to face this new threat. He knew he had to take drastic measures to protect them and the rest of the galaxy from the impending Vorsath invasion. Delving deeper into the progenitors' technology, Scott began to construct a powerful weapon capable of sealing the Vorsath away once more. He worked feverishly, assembling glowing components and weaving intricate energy matrices, but as the weapon took shape, he realized that it required a tremendous amount of energy to function. With a sinking feeling, Scott understood that he faced an impossible choice. To power the weapon, he would have to sacrifice the Unity Stone, the very artifact that had brought peace and unity to the Ledosian people. The thought of plunging them back into chaos tore at his heart, but the alternative, allowing the Vorsath to consume the planet and the entire galaxy, was unthinkable. As Scott struggled with his decision, the energy anomalies grew more frequent and intense. Glowing fissures split the ground, and the skies above the Ledosian cities churned with swirling vortexes of energy. The first Vorsath scouts began to materialize on the planet's surface, their forms shimmering and insubstantial, but their malevolent presence palpable. The Ledosians, led by Hydrus and the reformed warlords, mobilized to defend their world. They fought bravely, wielding energy shields and plasma weapons reverse-engineered from the progenitors' technology, but they were vastly outmatched by the Vorsath's advanced capabilities and energy-based powers. The air crackled with the screams of the dying and the sizzling of disintegrating flesh. Scott, his heart pounding, knew that time was running out. He had to make a choice, and he had to make it now. With trembling hands, he reached for the Unity Stone, feeling its pulsing warmth beneath his fingers. The fate of the Ledosians and the entire galaxy hung in the balance, and the weight of his decision pressed down upon him like a physical force. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as he weighed the consequences of his actions. The Unity Stone hummed with power, a tangible reminder of the peace and unity it had brought to the Ledosian people. But the Vorsath's energy signatures grew stronger by the moment, and the screams of the Ledosians echoed in his ears. Scott's fingers tightened around the Unity Stone, his knuckles turning white. He had to act, had to make the impossible choice. The fate of countless lives rested on his shoulders, and the weight of that responsibility threatened to crush him. With a final, agonized breath, he made his decision. Scott's heart hammered in his chest as he raced through the crumbling temple, the Unity Stone clutched tightly in his hand. The ancient structure shuddered and groaned around him, the walls cracking and dust raining down from the ceiling. Outside, the sounds of battle raged on, the cries of the wounded and dying mingling with the sizzling of plasma weapons and the unearthly shrieks of the Vorsath. He burst into the makeshift command center, a hastily assembled collection of salvaged progenitor technology and flickering holographic displays. Tyrix looked up from his work, his scaly face etched with worry. "Scott! The Vorsath are breaking through our defenses. We don't have much time." As he worked, a commotion erupted behind him. Scott spun around, his eyes widening in shock, as a group of Ledosian infiltrators burst into the chamber, their weapons leveled at him. "Step away from the weapon," their leader snarled, his eyes glinting with a fanatic light. "The Unity Stone belongs to us." Scott shook his head, his voice calm but firm. "No, the stone belongs to all Ledosians. We must use its power to stop the Vorsath, or we will all perish." The infiltrators advanced, their claws tightening on their weapons. Scott braced himself, ready to defend the stone with his life. But before they could strike, Tyrix leaped forward, his own weapon flashing in the dim light. The chamber erupted into chaos, plasma bolts scorching the air and sizzling against the ancient stone. Scott dove for cover, clutching the Unity Stone to his chest. A searing pain lanced through his shoulder as a plasma bolt grazed him, the smell of burned flesh filling his nostrils. He gritted his teeth, fighting through the pain as he crawled towards the console. Tyrix fought like a demon, his weapon a blur of motion as he fended off the attackers. But there were too many of them, and he was soon overwhelmed. A plasma bolt caught him in the chest, and he crumpled to the ground, his weapon clattering from his grasp. With a final burst of strength, Scott heaved himself to his feet and slammed the Unity Stone into place. The console hummed with power, the ancient circuitry coming to life as the stone's energy flowed through it. Scott's vision blurred, his blood loss and exhaustion taking their toll. But he forced himself to focus, his fingers flying over the controls as he activated the weapon. A blinding pulse of energy erupted from the temple, a shimmering wave that rippled out across the planet's surface. The Vorsath, caught in the wave's path, let out unearthly shrieks of agony as their energy-based forms began to unravel and dissipate. The sky above the temple blazed with an eerie light, the air crackling with the discharge of ancient progenitor technology. As the energy wave faded, an eerie silence descended over the battlefield. The Ledosians emerged from their shelters, their eyes wide with awe and disbelief as they surveyed the devastation wrought by the weapon. The once lush jungles and forests had been reduced to charred husks, the ground scorched and blackened by the energy pulse. Scott slumped against the console, his vision swimming and his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked down at the fallen form of Tyrix, a wave of grief and guilt washing over him. The young scribe had given his life to protect the stone, to give Scott the chance to save their world. The Ledosians gathered around the temple, their voices rising in a chorus of triumph and sorrow. They hailed Scott as a hero, the savior who had delivered them from the Vorsath threat. But as Scott looked out over the devastated landscape, he knew that his actions had come at a terrible cost. The Unity Stone was gone, its power expended in the activation of the weapon. The Ledosians would have to find a new way to maintain their unity and rebuild their shattered world. And Scott, his body battered and his mind haunted by the secrets of the progenitors, knew that his journey was far from over. As the Ledosians tended to their wounded and began the long process of rebuilding, Scott lay in a makeshift infirmary, his injuries slowly healing under the ministrations of the Ledosian healers. But even as his body mended, His mind raced with unanswered questions and unresolved doubts. The true nature of the Vorsath threat still eluded him, as did the full extent of the progenitor's influence on the galaxy. He knew that he would have to delve deeper into the mystery to uncover the secrets that had been hidden for so long. But for now, he could only rest and gather his strength, knowing that the challenges ahead would test him in ways he had never been tested before. The fate of the Ledosians, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested on his shoulders, and he could not afford to fail. As Scott lay in the makeshift infirmary, his body slowly mending under the watchful eyes of the Ledosian healers, his mind raced with unanswered questions. The secrets of the progenitors and their connection to the Vorsath consumed his thoughts, driving him to spend every waking moment studying the remnants of the ancient temple and the advanced technology left behind. Day after day, Scott pored over the intricate carvings and glowing holographic displays, his eyes straining in the dim light of the ruined chamber. He barely noticed the passage of time, his meals left untouched and his wounds left unattended as he delved deeper into the mysteries of the past. Hydrus and Tyrix, their faces etched with concern, tried to pull Scott away from his obsessive research. They urged him to rest, to allow his body and mind to heal, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. Scott brushed them aside, his voice hoarse and his eyes fevered as he mumbled about the importance of his work. As the days turned into weeks, Scott's health began to deteriorate. His wounds, once healing, now festered and oozed, the lingering effects of his exposure to the progenitor technology taking their toll. His skin grew pallid and his eyes sunken, the weight of his discoveries bearing down upon him like a physical burden. One day, as Scott stumbled through the ruins, his vision blurring and his steps faltering, he found himself in a hidden chamber deep within the temple. The walls pulsed with an eerie green light, and the air hummed with a strange energy that made his skin crawl. In the center of the chamber stood a towering structure, its surface covered in pulsing veins of light. Scott approached it cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. As he laid his hand upon the structure's surface, a holographic display flickered to life, bathing the chamber in an eerie glow. Scott's eyes widened in horror as he read the ancient text scrolling across the display. The progenitors, in their desperation to defeat the Vorsath, had created a doomsday device capable of wiping out all organic life in the galaxy. A weapon of last resort, designed to be activated only in the face of total annihilation. With a sinking feeling, Scott realized that the energy pulse he had unleashed to defeat the Vorsath had not only devastated the Ledosian ecosystem, but had also reactivated this ancient weapon. The activation sequence had already begun, and there was no way to stop it. Scott stumbled back from the structure, his mind reeling with the implications of his discovery. He knew he had to warn the Ledosians, to give them a chance to prepare for the impending doom. With a heavy heart, he made his way back to the surface, his steps leaden and his spirit broken. Hydrus and Tyrix were waiting for him at the entrance to the temple, their faces etched with worry. Scott, his voice trembling, explained the nature of his discovery and the terrible fate that awaited them all. The Ledosians, their eyes wide with fear and despair, listened in stunned silence as Scott laid out the grim reality of their situation. In the days that followed, a sense of hopelessness settled over the Ledosian people. They went about their daily lives in a daze, their minds numb with the knowledge of the impending destruction. Some wept openly in the streets, while others retreated to their homes, seeking solace in the arms of their loved ones. Scott, his mind racing with desperate plans and half-formed ideas, worked tirelessly to find a way to avert the catastrophe. He pored over the progenitor technology, searching for any clue or hint that might lead to a solution. But as the days passed, and the activation sequence ticked ever closer to completion, hope began to fade. It was in a moment of despair, as Scott sat amidst the ruins of the temple, his head in his hands, that a final desperate plan began to take shape in his mind. Using the last of the progenitor technology, he would create a temporal stasis field around the Ledosian planet, freezing it in time and preventing the doomsday device from fully activating. But the process would require a tremendous amount of energy, and Scott knew that he would have to sacrifice himself to maintain the field. He would have to remain outside the stasis bubble, forever cut off from the Ledosians and the rest of the galaxy. With a heavy heart, Scott gathered Hydrus, Tyrix, and the other Ledosian leaders together and explained his plan. There were tears and protests, but in the end, they all knew that it was the only way to buy the galaxy more time. As Scott prepared to implement his plan, he bid a tearful farewell to his friends and allies. He embraced Hydrus and Tyrix, his voice thick with emotion, as he expressed his regret for leading them down this path and his hope that they would find a way to survive and rebuild in the time he had given them. With a final determined nod, Scott activated the temporal stasis field. A shimmering bubble of energy enveloped the planet, freezing it in a single moment of time. The Ledosians, suspended in an eternal instant, were left to ponder their fate and the sacrifice of the human who had once been their savior. Scott, now alone in the silence of a dying galaxy, settled in for his final vigil. He watched as the stars began to flicker and fade, one by one, the darkness closing in around him like a shroud. But even as the end drew near, he took solace in the knowledge that he had given the Ledosians and the rest of the galaxy a chance, however slim, to find a way to avert the impending catastrophe. As the last of the light faded from the sky and the final star winked out of existence, Scott closed his eyes, his final thoughts a prayer for the future of the galaxy and the hope that his sacrifice would not be in vain. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.